participation and early action are key to accelerating clean, fair and inclusive energy transition. It is my absolute pleasure to be sharing this panel and moderating this panel with a high-level panel of speakers, including Phil Cole, Director of Industrial Affairs at Wind Europe, Heike Winslet, Director of Energy Policies and Climate Change at the Spanish Wind Association, Pablo Eviacoch, Head of Unit Renewables Integration and Secure, I'm missing the last part. Secure Electricity, there we go. At the International Energy Agency, Raúl Alfaro Pelico, Director of Knowledge, Policy and Finance Center at IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and Isabela del Alcázar, who's Chief Purpose and Sustainability Officer at IE University. We know that we need a firm resolve to get to 1.5 degrees, and for that we need not only a predictable legal framework, this has to be implemented, and it has to be implemented with either active or passive, but preferably active acceptance by citizens. So we're here today to discuss many of these issues with some of the leading experts in the field. I'm going to ask them to first make some initial comments, opening remarks, and then we'll have a round of exchange and questions between the panelists and myself, and then with the audience. So without further ado, Phil, could you please start us off?
Yeah, thanks very much, Lara, and great to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Delighted to take part. I think I'll keep my opening remarks very, very brief and then pass over to the others. There is going to be no energy transition unless it is a just transition, which allows people to get involved, feel that they are part of the process. And I think this is, for a period of time, we've been in a situation where we have almost been telling people that the energy transition needs to happen. But what we are now starting to see with European elections and elections in other parts of the world, a slight shift, or in some cases more of a shift to the centre-right and the right. So to continue the energy transition, we need to make sure that people feel part of that process. And I know we'll talk about that a lot on the panel, so I won't say much more than that. There's many ways we can do this. I think we need to be focusing a lot more on transparency of the process, making sort of discussions take place quicker and at earlier stages with the wider civil society base and wider stakeholders, and allowing people to have their say and take part in that overall permitting process at earlier stages is going to be really key. I'll leave it there for now, and we'll pick this up in the discussion.
Thank you, Phil. That was super quick. That's fantastic. So, Heike, would you like to kick us off as well?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, it's a pleasure to be with you here today. From the point of view, at least from the Spanish wind energy sector, we have seen that the question of social acceptance has become a very important issue. But unfortunately, it has come at the moment when all the projects are already let's say, in the permitting process or at the end of the permitting process. There was no debate 4 years ago. Maybe when we did the NCEPs, maybe it would have been a good idea to make a referendum at national level, each country, so you would have the debate. All the citizens will have to vote. We want to do the energy transition. And that moment they will have to think, and all the parties would have had to explain the energy transition and what it means, because now we are late. Now they receive a lot of misleading information about what it is not. I mean, all the problems with the acceptance of renewable projects, all the things that are said about changing cars to electrification, all the problems that come with hydrogen, etc., etc. So we have a lot of objectives, very objectives, and very, very, very ambitious. But at the same time, the society has not received the basic information, which is what do I have to do and what is my role in this energy transition. And from the point of view of companies, we are expected now to do the job that should have been done before, maybe with a combination of both companies and the governments and local authorities. But now it's the job of the companies to explain the projects, to go to to the territory, explain why this project is good, and without the help of the local administrations, sometimes. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And this is very hard. And it's becoming even more harder because as one of the main problems we have, I call it the Tower of Babel problem, social media are not helping. Because immediately when somebody says something about a project somewhere, it can be thousands of retweets or whatever you call it. And then suddenly a politician says, wow, 200, 1,000 or 2,000 people have retweeted this thing about this bad renewable project. And they think that is the people, they think that that's the people that live close to the project. Well, it's not true. They are living all over the world. They can be even in some other country, retweeting the same. And the decisions are made on a lot of times on social media and not on legal issues. Social media issues are taking advantage over legal issues, and this is nonsense. We are going to, as I said, if you remember the Bible, it says at some point the humans wanted to get up to God, and they were building these towers, so God said, no, you are not going to be gods. I'm going to spread you are going to not understand each other anymore. You are going to talk all different languages. That's the same thing with social media. We are not talking the same language. Society, companies, governments, we don't seem to agree on anything at this, when it comes to really, really speed up the decarbonization that is needed to achieve the objectives we want as a society.
Wow, powerful initial statement. So two things that I want to pick up on and then ask Isabella, because I think that you've mentioned both disinformation, which is an issue that we're all grappling with, especially not only on climate change, but also on other very socially important issues, but also the lack of literacy in terms of energy deployment, and we have very hefty goals. We have the goal of tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency by 2030. We need to implement the UAE consensus. So my question would be, what is what are universities, what is the education system doing? I know you have a key role in what's happening at your own university, but I don't know whether you can give us a broad overview of how the education system can spread the word and increase awareness and lower polarization and increase that energy literacy. Thank you, Isabella.
So, thank you. It's a good question. So, as Phil was saying, no one's questioning the transition anymore. I mean, it's here, and that's my main takeaway from COP. The transition is happening, and there's a strong need for those transition plans so that we can fulfill our mandate. No, each of our mandates different. So there are some gaps that are identified, and I do think that's where universities and other research centers and many other stakeholders can come in and bring value. First, understanding the world, which is important, and creating spaces for dialogue and understanding each of the different perspectives. You were talking about the importance of maybe having this conversation some years ago, no? Because this way you can define clear plans that are responding to specific motivations, and that maybe they will ease the way and make it easier for each of us to comply and to commit, no? So that's one thing, and it's, I would say, any university has a triple mission. The first of the actions that are expected from a university, any educational institution, is providing the right skills and knowledge. Yes, this is also something very important because there are several competences that need to be developed at the same time that we are defining our transition plans. And this is key. Second is contributing with the adequate research, very important. that the research is, of course, in depth and academic and so on, but also relevant and applied to real-world problems. Thirdly, I think our mission, and I'm talking not only about IE, as you said, it's to share the outputs of this research and with your peers, and this way you can kind of transform society. Like I like to say that knowledge fuels action, and action is what really drives change, no? And also I would say that it's our role, together with different peers from other sectors and other profiles and so on, to do a little bit of foresighting too. Because, okay, yes, this is what we have today. What is it that we are going to need tomorrow? And well, I would say that's kind of where I think we can add value. Yeah.
Thank you, Isabella. So skills and knowledge, research applied to policy. And perhaps communicating, those very primary research to results to policymakers in a way that, it can be understood and applied, and foresight, which is absolutely crucial. Raúl, over to you. I know you have very interesting things to say about just transition, and about the initiative between Spain and Sierra Leone that you and your department have been pushing for very intensely. And picking up on Phil's comment on the need for that just transition, can you take us through how to accelerate not only the deployment of renewables, but also a just, equitable, fair transition for all? Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. First, I'd like to thank the Spain Pavilion and Real Instituto Elcano for the invitation to IRENA to share this panel. I'm really pleased to be surrounded by experts in this area as well, and I'm going to touch on some of the points that my fellow panelists have touched on. I know that this discussion about the how, it's very important. It is equally important to also start with the what. What is it that we need to achieve? That way we have a sense of the magnitude of the challenge, but also a reality of the opportunity as well. This touches on some of the points about misinformation. So the what, you mentioned tripling. I think it's important to understand what that means, what's involved in that, because the agreement that was reached last year in Dubai with the goal of tripling renewables, doubling efficiency, as well as shifting away from fossil fuels, it's huge. However, it's technically feasible, it's economically viable. So let's be clear about that. We've seen already over the past 5 to 10 years significant trends of renewable energy investment. Last year alone, the world added 473 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, which is the largest increase ever. I think it's 54% from the previous year. So we know what we need to do. We're doing it already. Now, the challenge is that we need to do that double, in fact, triple. Because if we look at the target that we have set ourselves, and this is based on data, this is not opinions, this is science-based targets, our analysis shows that we need to have renewable energy capacity of 11.2 terawatts by 2030, and current capacity is 3.6 gigawatts. And I think when you look at that, that's where the tripling comes from. But actually, it means adding renewable energy by a factor of 1,000 megawatts every year, which is double what we're doing right now. So that's the big challenge. And I think it's important to keep that. Behind that challenge, there is the investment that is required. And I think it's important that, although Finance Day was yesterday, Finance Day will be spoken every day. But I think it's good to put numbers to that finance. The 473 gigawatts that were added represented about $570 billion worth of investment. In order to get to the 11.2 terawatt, we need double that in fact, triple, $1.5 trillion of energy transition investments. So that is the challenge. Now, sorry? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you. So the how, and I'm going to the details, but we've analyzed, we recently launched our tracking report on tripling and doubling, and we are looking at the enablers to achieve that, and there are 5. Some of them have been touched on, policies and regulations. I think Heikki mentioned that, and I'll go into more detail later on. We need the skills, capacities, as well as looking at things from a supply chain perspective, which is some of the work that education institutions as well as the industry needs to work on. We obviously need finance, but actually finance means many things. It's not just the finance for the infrastructure, and I can speak about that a little bit later. We need international collaboration, because oftentimes, IRENA, as international governmental organization with 170 members, we speak a lot to governments, but we also need to bring companies as well as civil society organizations. And so that's where international collaboration is critical. And then the last thing is on infrastructure. And you would have noticed that I haven't said anything about justice yet, but behind each of the enablers, there is people aspects, there is environmental aspects that I'm going to talk in more detail in the next round of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Raul. That was great. So it is feasible. We can get there. There's a financing challenge that is in the 1.3 trillion, which is a number floated around during this COP as well, if I'm not mistaken. So we need to push for just transition in all of the enablers: policy, regulation, skills and capacity, finance, international collaboration, and infrastructure. And I would like to very briefly follow up with the question, can you tell us the name of the report so that everyone who's listening online and here in the room can download it?
Thank you. It's I had it over there. It's actually behind the room. I should have it here for sale. It's free since yesterday. It's called the Tracking, the 2030 Outcomes of the UAE Consensus, tripling renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency. It's done in collaboration with the Global Renewables Alliance, as well as in partnership with the Troika of the COP28, COP29 and COP30 presidencies of the UAE, Azerbaiyjan and Brazil respectively.
Fantastic. Pablo, I'm leaving you to last because I'm going to start the questions with you first, because I'm conscious that you have another very important event after. So I'm going to ask you perhaps to give us an overview of what is needed to anticipate and accelerate the deployment of renewables and the meeting of our UAE goals on transitioning away from fossil fuels, perhaps focusing on emerging economies. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And it's very strange to hear myself while I'm speaking. I'm going to do like this. So for starting, I completely agree with you, Raul, and I'm very happy that you brought those numbers, because it's both sides to it. Really, it is an immense challenge, but it is doable. And I think that's a reason to be hopeful and not hopeless. Now, part of that you mentioned is really important, is that most of this growth, this 11,000 gigawatts, is going to take place in emerging economies. And this, for one, is going to be a challenge for a couple of reasons. But I would like to start maybe think a bit about anticipation and early action. Because one thing that we've been trying to remind people and to remind governments is that tripling renewable energy capacity is excellent, it's really important. But that's not by itself what's going to decarbonize the power system. What we need is to make sure that this capacity becomes energy. And this is a challenge that is becoming sometimes increasingly difficult. And here I'm talking about the challenge of integrating renewable energy. It is complicated because it has some insidious feedback loops sometimes. And what do I mean by this? When we talk sometimes with industry, what we're starting to see is that in some emerging economies, investment is being looked at with a bit of skepticism because of increasing curtailment or because of lack of guarantees that my new wind turbine or my new solar panel will be able to sell electricity and will be able to sell it at a price that makes the business case solid. And for this reason, when we talk about anticipation, for me this is one of the main issues. We need to anticipate and have this strategic and holistic view. We can no longer afford to just look at new capacity and invest in it, but we really need to have an energy sector perspective. And why it's so important. let's think about grids, because grids have been put into the center stage recently, and the need to really increase investment and kilometers of grids. Phil, you're doing wind turbines, you guys are doing wind turbines. Depending on which place around the world, you can build a new wind project in 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, something like that, right? A new high voltage line in advanced economies is taking easily 9 years, 10 years.
Crazy, crazy.
So what does that mean? Well, you know that grids are regulated typically. That means that they need to go through a regulator, they need to show a business case, they need to be approved because this will increase the tariffs. You need to have grids being built years in advance of new projects. If you're talking about demand, things like electrifying an industry or new chargers for electric vehicles, this can be done in a year, even less than a year. So what does it mean? It means that you need to imagine a business case and get new grid projects into the table of regulators and justify them before you can even think about what kind of projects this transmission line is going to be serving. And this creates a big challenge out of the nature of the commodity. If you don't have a strategic view to address this problem, you're going to find yourself stuck. And what do I mean by stuck? I mean that we have over 2,500 gigawatts of renewable energy projects stuck in connection queues globally. Now, you mentioned stakeholders, and I think that's excellent. And I would like to bring on board one stakeholder that I find it's usually missed. And I did a quick Control F on the program of COP to see how often this word is mentioned, and it's not very often. Because we see industry, we see ministries, we see civil society, we don't really see regulators, you know? And for me, this is a big issue. Why? Because many of the elements of the enabling infrastructure are regulated assets. And regulators need to be part of the discussion and need to be given the tools, the mandate, and the resources that are needed in order to make the strategic vision and the strategic decisions to take place. From the perspective of fairness, regulators are essential. Regulators are the ones that are going to be, for one hand side, ensuring that we have consumer tariffs that ensure consumer protection, that are affordable, that safety is included, that natural protection is included. But at the same time, you need to think of regulators as the ones that will be able to enable policy actions to take place. And if I may allow myself a strange sports synonym, because I've asked people, what do you think of regulators? And they, oh, well, football, regulators like the referee, you know, the guy that once in a while comes, gives you a yellow card, a red card, and then people scream at them. And I think this is not the right way of thinking about it. Ideally, we should have regulators be a bit like, this is a strange sport, but maybe, do you know winter sports? There's a sport called curling, you know, where you throw a stone and you try to aim towards the target, and then you have a man or a woman that is in front of the stone in the ice, sweeping very fast to make sure that the stone reaches the point as easy as it can. And that should be the role of regulators, the role of ensuring that projects advance, that they get to the right point, considering all different stakeholders, instead of becoming roadblocks in the way. And I'm not saying that regulators are doing a bad job. I'm saying that regulators sometimes are given the wrong job description, and that the mandate that was created should be revised once in a while. Now, finally, my final point, because I really like the topic of inclusive transitions, and I was lucky enough to be able to do a PhD on the topic when I was in Denmark, looking really at 2050 and the development of wind energy. And in the field, there was one term that, funnily enough, I haven't heard here, which is NIMBY, you know, this not in my backyard, or which I find quite dismissive. And one of the things that we did in this analysis as part of my PhD was try to take a look at how much of NIMBY is an economic decision versus how much it is being against things. In Denmark, we looked at a database of all household real estate transactions, houses being bought and sold. And with a GIS model, we looked at what is the impact on household prices if you live in the view of a wind turbine or if you live under the noise range of a wind turbine. And what it shows is that if you can hear and see a wind turbine, basically you lose roughly 10% of your real estate price when you sell your house. Now, is it insurmountable? No, it is not. But I think it's very important to remember that when we're talking about social acceptance, and maybe we should talk maybe about social approval, it is not just being against it, and I agree that indeed there are sometimes issues with communication, but there are also economic factors that we're seeing when we're talking about the distribution of benefits and costs. And I think one of the best ways that industries have found their way around it is finding ways to advance the social license to operate and to bring communities on board with these projects. And for me, that would be a final thought, that social acceptance is not just having people be okay with it, but at some point you want them to embrace it and be pushing for it. So those are my first thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. I have two follow-up questions for you. So, do we need power market reforms worldwide? Because you've questioned the fact that, perhaps we don't have a solid business case. We know we've been through a painful growth process and power market reform in the European Union. Are you advocating for something similar in other jurisdictions? Would be my first follow-up question. And I'm so happy that you did your PhD on NIMBY, because then I can ask you about whether there's anything the International Energy Agency is doing on NIMBY, and whether you have concrete examples, not only in Denmark, but also in other jurisdictions that you can share with us in order to limit that NIMBY syndrome. Our own research at Elcano shows that we need, even if people are concerned about climate change, and in principle they are willing to accept climate policies, you need those policies in place in order to make sure that the likelihood of acceptance is high. We need peer pressure, so we need people to talk about climate change. We need engagement, not only with our family and our partners, but with friends and people at work. So that engagement increases the likelihood of climate policy acceptance. And it's very important to increase the self-sufficiency, that self-efficacy feeling. If we design policies thinking that people are completely capable of undertaking actions, then we're going to miss the target. And that's going to reduce the acceptance of climate policies. So if you could perhaps add to that and add to case studies that you can share, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Those are quite extensive questions. So starting on the power markets. Well, keeping in mind that if you look at it globally, not all countries even have deregulated power markets. And that means that in many cases you have single buyer systems. So the evolution of how we trade electricity is constantly ongoing. And I would say that power markets are a design choice, and that is constantly under evolution. Now, I think that referring to the case of Europe, that there's a couple of things that we learned. Some of them were tough lessons, some of them were quite instructive. I think the first one that does not often get said enough is that in a case of actual lack of fuel, power markets managed to keep the lights on. And the signals that came from power markets provided very tough incentives to very tough decisions being made on energy savings, on demand restraint, but that managed to fulfill the basic mandate of a dispatching system, which is to keep the lights on. Another thing that we learned is that we could have done better on protecting small and medium consumers particularly, and there's been quite a strong focus on this regarding retail market design and trying to find a better balance between what are the incentives to bring the behavior that we need, to bring the demand response, the flexibility, the operation of storage, while at the same time providing households and small businesses with consumer protection and with the ability to not to be overexposed to risks that some of us don't understand, or some of us, even if we understand them, we don't have a good way to hedge them and to deal with them. Another aspect is that we're seeing the need to better find ways to drive investment. So what I'm highlighting here is this idea that when we talk about the electricity market, in reality, it's not one. It's a series of markets that are interconnected and that should and do fulfill different purposes. You can have a day-ahead and a spot market focusing on security and efficiency. You can have a retail market focusing on consumer protection and behavior incentives. And you should have long-term markets that are focusing on driving investment and providing risk hedging. And I think this is one of the things that we're seeing. Now, is it a solved problem? Of course not. This is really at the forefront of the discussions we're having. In Europe, the discussion has been quite a bit about CFDs, about PPAs, maybe about futures and forwards and how to drive investment and risk hedging. But to be honest, the way we see it is that there's a lot of work to be done. And even when we say CFDs are great, there's no two CFDs are the same. And how you design them can have a lot of positive impacts. On the question about social acceptance, because I refuse to use the term NIMBY anymore, to be honest, if we had all the solutions, we would be having a quite different conversation. And this is a really tricky question. Now, At the AA, we've had a significant growth on a new team where I would be happy to put you in contact with my colleague Brian Matherway, who is the head of the Inclusive Transitions team. And one of the starting points, you really mentioned it, is related to education, but also to having an understanding that when you talk about energy, you're not just talking about energy. Every single topic that is of importance today has a link to energy, be that healthcare, be that geopolitics, economic growth and competitiveness, industrial development, decarbonization, and that means that we need to get used to have a bit of a broader range of stakeholders. And here there's two that we found that are very important stakeholders to bring on the table. And one of them is youth. Really, when you talk about things like acceptance, the voice of the youth is really important. Not just to be included in the discussions, but also to be supported. And how can we make sure that our analysis provides a better understanding for thought leaders and for youth thought leaders that can use it to talk to their families, to talk to their friends, to talk to their politicians and representatives. And the second group is labor unions, sindicatos, like you call in Spain, where globally we're trying to understand better what are their concerns, what are the good things that we can see from the energy transition, what are their fears, and how can we make sure that when we're talking about transitioning, we're considering the positive sides and the negative sides. Because I think it's quite important, to be honest, that any transformation can have winners and can have losers. Even if as a whole it is a better situation. We need to make sure that those that may feel that are at a disadvantage during the transition are not only heard, but also that their concerns are addressed. And here again, maybe I look at my colleagues from the educational side. We see that re-education, reskilling, and the support for people that will need to change their careers will become extremely important. I'd be happy to follow up on this as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So Isabel, I don't know whether you want to react because you've been mentioned twice in the last response. So there you go.
Just a quick reaction. So not only, and thinking, so that we don't only think in the developed countries, but it's not only about reskilling and skilling and so on. It's about investment in basic education in other regions also. And I think there's a huge gap there. And therefore this is something that we have to think of. So that would be my reaction basically to education. Of course, it's, for me, SDG number 4 actually is the key to solve most of the SDGs. As we're here, we can talk about SDGs. I wanted also to react to something that has been said, and everyone agrees, on the times that it takes and the risks to move forward these projects. And if you think about the players and that exist, we are missing here the right framework for innovators, small and medium-sized companies, startups and so on, because they don't have the pockets to move forward any energy project, especially if this is linked to, as you were saying, grid development and so on. So therefore they will be swallowed by the big players, and therefore I do believe that there's an issue here that I hadn't anticipated, and I don't know how we should overcome it, but it's important that we create the right environment and spaces for these innovators to be able to move forward their projects. This is more a reaction and a question I ask to everyone, because I do think that it's important also for the transition.
So can I follow up? And I see Raul holding the mic, so I'll give the floor to you very quickly. I'm assuming to react to what you've heard. But Isabel, I wanted you to reflect before I jump onto Raul's reactions on, and we've spoken about this before, the dialogue and understanding for policy effectiveness. How can we do this? Because we've talked about the need for policies, we've talked about the need for infrastructure, the need for education, but that dialogue, I'm interested in seeing how you are perhaps fostering it from IE, and how do you see it across all of the curricula?
Okay, so maybe I can come with an example of a program. Well, it's an initiative we have at our university, we understand, and we'll use the case of energy, as it's the panel about here. We understand that there are many solutions. There are different stakeholders that have been working, research units, centers, and so on, in depth in finding solutions based on policy and other types of innovation, okay, not only policy, but in financial instruments, in business models, in new materials. I mean, everything is important. The truth is that when you try to put this like more theoretical theorems or solutions in practice, there's a disconnect because, as we were saying at the beginning, the different stakeholders haven't been asked, how do you understand this? So here we decided to move forward like a multi-stakeholder dialogue space to and to convene people from the private sector, public administrations, 3 levels of public administrations, national, regional and local, let's say, because also the incentives are different. Not everything is the same for each administration. Civil society organizations, not only research institutions, but also unions and so on, because everyone has a different perspective and a stake, and they're trying to push forward a different agenda. And suddenly creating these spaces and building on each other's knowledge, okay, because avoiding duplications and so on, we've discovered the importance of sitting together. And maybe after 5 hours, the reactions from the different people involved are already very positive. How come this hasn't happened before? No? So you start unlocking simple issues that when persons talk to one another as human beings, they're more easily resolved. No? And well, this hasn't worked for me. For example, with we're working. One of the issues in energy is mobility, okay, and businesses, I mean industrials and the private sector, they want to move forward and they want to have more products and sell things to the citizens, and the citizens are willing also to be part of this transition, but maybe not with the solutions that the private sector has come up with, okay, and at the same time. The public administrations need to think, how can I facilitate this interaction to happen so that everyone is happy? No? So I guess us universities can be a good neutral space to generate dialogue and build on partnerships with the different stakeholders. Yeah.
I know IE is quite flexible in its programs. I know when I used to work there, they were quite flexible in the kind of people that I brought to my students. And my question, just very quickly, follow-up question, is can we expect this multi-stakeholder dialogues to make it into the case studies that students at IE, especially in the business world, are going to be studying?
Well, in the business world, and I guess in international relations programs also, because it's very important. Mapping your stakeholders is the base of negotiations. Maybe here. So yes, I'd love that to happen. Maybe we can write a case study together, and whoever
Fantastic.
else wants to join. Yeah.
Homework coming out of the event.
Yeah.
Thank you. Raúl, you had your mic up. I'm sure you have strong reactions.
No, I think Isabella has taken care of everything. She should do all the talking. And I'll tell you why. First of all, women play a very key role. I know we've spoken about youth, marginalized communities, but I don't think we pay enough attention of the role of women in the energy transition. And I'll give you a few statistics, because that's what we do. We do a lot of statistics. But like Michelle Obama said, behind every statistics, there's a story. So we do this annual review of renewable energy jobs. And the 11th series that we launched this year showed that there is a significant growth of renewable energy jobs. Right now it's at 16.2, which has been 1 million. which has been the largest increase ever. Most of that growth is obviously linked to the investments, and obviously countries like China, are leading the charge in terms of number of jobs added. And then you can add the US, the European Union, and so there is very little left for the rest of the world. Now, thinking about the how, because I've mentioned the what before, but the how is equally important, but also the who, right? Because when you look at the job generation capacity or potential, and when you compare the employment of women between the clean energy sectors vis-a-vis the fossil fuel sectors, it's not great because, for example, right now we have around 32% of the employment by women in renewable energy, but it's actually 10% higher than fossil fuels, which is 22%. And there is a significant space for growth. And why I mention that is because when we think about the places in the world where investment is not taking place, and that even agencies like the IEA and IRENA work together on. We jointly publish the SDG 7 tracking report every year. We do it together with the WHO, with Maria Neira from Spain. We also do it with the UN Statistics Division. Every year we keep counting 600 million people without access to electricity. In fact, the last number is 685 million, which is 10 million more than last year. Why I mention those numbers is because the majority of those millions are in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia. This is the same place where women play a key role. And why I say that is because despite the lack of access to electricity, it is in the women segment of the population where you see more innovation, more entrepreneurship. And if we nurture that, then we have a long way to go, but we have way more potential. I think it's very important to do it both in terms of formal education. That's why I prefer that Isabella does the talking on that. I will put a plug for one of the programs that IRENA is doing, which is the Energy Transition Educators Network, because we find that in order to really advance the energy transition, we need to start from the very beginning, and we really need to look at all the educational curricula globally to ensure that renewable energy is already there, because otherwise it's not going to happen. The second thing that needs to happen is that there has to be additional support for empowerment, and by that I mean confidence building. We have 170 members that we support. In the majority of those member states, women from the very beginning are told not to pursue science, technology, engineering, and maths subjects. So you're already, creating a barrier that shouldn't be there in the first place. But then I take it a step forward, because precisely those countries that don't have access to electricity are those countries that also lack very strong formal education systems. But that doesn't mean that, therefore, they have no chance to embark on the energy transition. Precisely, fossil fuels requires significant skills, particularly technical skills. But the beauty of renewable energy is that we need all kinds of skills. You may not even need to have a diploma, on the wall, and you can still be a solar PV installer. You can still be an entrepreneur. And just like my colleague Pablo mentioned, we need to look at other sectors, the productive activities, because that's also where the broader economy plays a role. And in sub-Saharan Africa, in Southeast Asia, that's where you see women leading the charge. So I think it's very important that we put women at the center of the conversation. And let me just stop here, because otherwise I'm taking the space for everybody else, and then for Isabella.
Thank you so much, Raul. That is extremely interesting to hear. I don't know whether you've done an analysis of the extent to which green jobs have grown in the past decade in the different tranches of education. So you said, renewables, you don't need perhaps all of the skills that you need to work on this sector compared to the fossil fuel sector in Spain. And I was pretty shocked about this, and this kind of leads me to understand certain types of social backlash against the green transition. The largest growth in jobs, according to the Economic and Social Council, in the past decade has been in the high education tranche. and the highest growth for the green jobs, and the highest growth for the fossil fuel sector has been in the lowest tranche of education. So I think this, highest growth in low, initial stages of education in the brown sector compared to highest growth in the highest education sector for the green transition, that creates a gap that perhaps we need to address in order to face the low carbon transition head on. I don't know whether this is something that's, particular to Spain. This is data from 2011 to 2023 from this particular study. And I don't know whether anyone has information about this in other jurisdictions.
I have, but I'm conscious of taking airspace, but I'll say...
1 minute.
1 minute, okay, let's see if I can just do it in 1 minute. So that is true, but you need to add the time dimension. For how long? Because it's very easy when you have like coal, oil and gas, investment happens right now and you need the skills right now. But how long is that sector going to be there for? And if we're looking about just transition and we're talking about, if you're thinking about stranded assets, in the long run, the economy is really fast decarbonizing. And so in the short term, maybe, but in the long run, that's where you see significant potential for renewable energy. What we need to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, is that we look at education at different levels, both STEM positions, but also unqualified positions, because that's where you see significant growth potential.
Yes, but you need that social license right now, not in the medium term. So So my question is, what do we do about this in countries that are showing this type of trend? So perhaps we can leave that for later.
Quick answer. Yeah. We need to put money on that.
Okay.
Because we talk about finance and we talk about finance of the infrastructure. Nobody talks about the finance that you need for the educational sector. I think Isabella alluded to that. That's why I'm going to keep quiet from now on. There is social protection, funding. That needs money. It needs to come from the same place that we're looking at public finance for, the private sector to come in. Okay, what about, you mentioned social dialogues. That takes time. You talk about 5 hours. 5 hours in anybody's time is money, people say, right? Take somebody from a labor union and spend 5 hours with them. They have a job. Somebody needs to subsidize that. Somebody needs to pay for it. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Thank you. I know you've been patiently waiting and waving at me, Heike.
No.
So I'm going to drop a question first, because I think on the topic
I wanted to react to something that has been said.
Can I pose a question and then you can react to everything? Thank you. Because I still need to get to Phil. So very quickly, is the social license going to increase the price of the energy transition? And please react to anything you want before that. Yes.
Oh, well, actually I was going to talk about that.
Okay, great.
There is something, when you speak about, we need to differentiate because we are speaking about two different realities. Realities in countries we don't have access to electricity, and countries like Spain where we have abundance of electricity, even too much electricity sometimes. And the demand of electricity is not increasing in Spain, and that's a problem also in terms of for the investment, because if you invest, you are betting against existing players, which will try, of course, to defend their position. But that's another question. But the question is, this is common to both industrialized like Spain and in developing countries, is interest rate. Interest rate is fundamental to get in the capital and to have the business case for these projects. And whatever affects interest rates is going to affect the capacity to build these projects. And how do you affect the interest rates? Actually, the best solution in order to triple renewables would be to lower the risk rate of all developing countries. And that will be true also for Spain. We have a higher risk rate than Germany, actually. And that means just 1% difference of risk rate, 1% in the interest rate of a project, in Spain means €5 per megawatt hour, €5. 2 points, it's €10 per megawatt hour, that the project needs to get more in order to be viable. If you add, in Spain, this is the case of Spain, if you add like local regional authorities setting some taxes on renewables, that's €2 on top of that per megawatt hour. And then comes the government and sets 7% tax on renewables. And that's €2.8 per megawatt hour. In total, if you have all this risk, 2 points, plus regional governments, plus national government, you have more than €14 per megawatt hour increase in the price of the wholesale price. You are not competitive. And that means also for developing countries, the price of electricity is not really that important. It's more important to actually produce the electricity because there is a lack of production. But if we want in Europe to be competitive, we cannot approve policies that increase the price of the production of electricity. If we want to be competitive, last week I was talking with the big consumers of electricity, and the previous panel was also talking about that. They were saying we need a price of €40 per megawatt hour in order to be competitive. Who can provide that? At least in Spain, nobody can provide that. I mean, base load. Because all the taxes you have, all the local taxes you pay, all the compensations you pay to the territories, what you have to pay in the environmental impact assessment, you have to pay for preventive measures, corrective measures, and compensatory measures. And then comes the autonomous government and says, no, that's not enough. You have to pay even an environmental tax on top of that. And then you say, okay, I can pay. Please hurt me even more, but the price of electricity is not going to go down. And at a certain point, you will not be able even to do the projects because it doesn't make sense. You are just paying taxes and paying to the banks because you are increasing the interest rate of your loan for your project because there is so much risk. And risk it goes to the interest rate, and you have to pay more. And I know that the developing countries have the problem of the interest rates because they have 2-3 points higher interest rates or loans for renewables than other countries. We cannot make the same mistake, and they should not be doing the same mistake. You have to de-risk the renewable sphere. Renewable investments need to be de-risked, not increase the risk.
Can I just react to one point there? Because developing countries, they're not the ones adding the percentage. In fact, it's the banks saying that it's even riskier to invest in Nigeria than Spain. And so I just want to challenge that point because, as you said, in the developing world it's even worse, but it's not really coming from the regulators, it's even coming from the financiers.
Thank you. So I'm going to, in addition to the regulatory and monetary challenges that we are facing, and the financing challenges and the social license challenges that we've been talking about, I would want to come back to you, Phil, to talk about other challenges that we're facing. What is really holding us back, and how can we bring communities along? And if you're going to talk about permitting, which I'm sure you are, beyond talking about permitting, please, can we give concrete examples as to how we need to speed up permitting?
Yep, can definitely do that, because indeed I could talk about permitting and the need to solve permitting until the cows come home, but we always talk about it, but I do have some solutions, so that's the good thing. The first thing I will just indeed highlight to your point, Heike, we just need to get stuff built at this point now, and it was really interesting to hear from Pablo the points which I've heard before. Oh yeah, okay. That we've all travelled to Azerbaijan to talk about how we can tackle climate change and build more renewables. There's 2,500 gigawatts waiting for grid connections because we haven't managed to get our head around the fact we need to plan and forward plan our grid systems, which is just insane to think about, right? And it's just these are projects ready to get built and go forward. I will sort of indeed mention permitting. How do we solve the permitting challenge, which is just an ongoing conversation? Digitalize the permitting process. It still amazes me today in Europe. It's vastly mostly, paper-based. I've heard many stories over the years I've been involved in the wind industry. The paperwork gets lost in the post. What happens? The permit application doesn't move forward. Someone goes on sick leave, leaves the paperwork on their desk. The paperwork doesn't get moved forward. And there is many cases where months and months are lost for a very simple permit application because the paperwork just gets lost or people don't give it to the next person in the chain. By digitalizing the permitting process, you also help the clean and just transition because it adds that element of transparency. Everyone can see where the process is. Everyone can see where the blockage is. This is really important, and it's a must-do. At the end of last year, the European Commission brought out the wind power package, which included the need of digitalised permitting. I know that Spain was a big champion of this point with Sara Agasan and Teresa Ribera and all the team there. That's been really important to see. We just now need to see it implemented. And I had a conversation yesterday with the chief negotiator of an African nation who said to me, I can't believe Europe still uses paper. We semi-digitalized our processes years ago for permitting. So it just shows that we have developing nations, as we would regard them, leapfrogging and getting over the issues we are now dealing with. So I think that is a really interesting case that we need to really concentrate on and think about. The other element that we need to get right is just getting forward and pushing forward with common sense. So I'll give a really good example from the UK. So the UK government recently established what they call mission control. Mission control is all about pushing forward with the clean transition. Mission control is all about getting rid of the nonsense that blocks renewable energy projects getting built. So mission control is led by someone called Chris Stark, a fairly well-known name in the climate world, and he reports directly to Ed Miliband, the Secretary of State for Energy. And his job is to talk to industry and understand where the bottlenecks are. What is stopping these projects getting built? And it's his role then to report back and make recommendations to the government on how these blockages can just be moved. And what we are seeing now is hopefully more of these sorts of examples taking place across Europe. And we do need a link between government and industry where discussions can take place, where it's not just the usual very nice pleasantries. You meet once or twice a year, you make some nice conversation and nothing actually happens. We don't have time anymore to sort of keep going on in this process every single year, coming to Bakú or Brazil next year, having good conversations and then going back to the national governments and finding things aren't happening. So I think those are probably the three elements that I would really highlight. I was also really happy just to sit here and listen to the conversation around people, because people I've just found so far at COP this year, maybe just my experience so far, has been missing from the conversation. I actually remarked to a colleague this morning, I'm surprised that there's a lack of conversation around people in the energy transition. So it has been good to see that, and thank you, colleagues, for bringing that to the conversation. Yeah, common sense is what we need now. Just get on and build projects. Don't allow our own set policies, our own set regulations to get in the way of hitting our own goals. It just makes sense.
Thank you, Phil. And if I can just prod you a little bit more, because you've talked about the importance of people, but people not only in local communities, but people in government. Are we well equipped to speed up that permitting, even if we digitalise? And with that, we're going to have to wrap up.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll add to that. I mean, another big issue in the permitting challenges is we just don't have enough people to process the permitting paperwork. Now, digitalising permitting will help with this, so we don't have enough local civil servants who are pushing this forward. We do have the right people, I think, in governments. We have big ambitions, big goals, big commitments set by governments. What we need to do now is have that enabling sort of infrastructure around them to allow these elements to sort of be put in place and actually pushed forward. And I think if we all just come back together, realise that we've all set goals, and I'm talking about governments now, sorry. Governments have set goals, they've set targets, and 2030 is really not that far away anymore. And, you know, we're building barely half, just in Europe, we're building barely half of the wind energy we need to hit those 2030 goals. So what I'm really actually worried about is that over the next year or two, governments around Europe and in other parts of the world will suddenly wake up and go, oh, we are nowhere near hitting our targets, and all of a sudden we have to build twice as much wind in 3 years' time, because that's not going to happen. So if we can, you know, industry coming together, supporting governments is going to be very important, and we just need to continue pushing that dialogue along and having those conversations.
Thank you ever so much. This has been a most instructive conversation. We all go away with homework, which is unusual for a panel, and I want to thank you for your time and the audience for being here and for watching us online. Thank you so much.
Thank you.